So my name is Charles Gatebe, for those who don't know me. I'm the coordinator for the Maniac Talks series, very popular and very, very interesting. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. And today, without a doubt, it's such a great honor for me to welcome our speaker, Christopher Scolese, our Center Director, NASA and Goddard Space Flight Center. So let's give him a round of applause. It's a big deal. That's all right. In fact, I was saying that this is an appropriate venue for this because this auditorium, GAT auditorium, is named for the very first NASA and Goddard Space Flight Center director. So this is a very fitting place for him to give a talk. He's a 12th director, so you can see there is that significance in this. So Chris was about 2 years old when NASA was founded, and too young to remember that moment. But he remembers as far back as 1962, when John Glenn circled Earth 3 times and became the first American to do so. Chris was hooked right away, became very interested in engineering, and followed every human space flight since then. He always felt a great desire to want to go off and do difficult things. This is reflected in his interview at the occasion of the 50th anniversary of NASA in 2008, where he said, and I quote, "When you throw a grand challenge out there, something that's very difficult, that's just at the reaches of known capability, you encourage others. You encourage other people in other fields to try things that they view as difficult or different." That's where NASA was in the past, and that's where NASA's future is. That's probably one of the things that inspired him to join NASA. So today, he's going to talk about his own journey, focusing on his career with NASA. With those few remarks, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome our speaker, Christopher Scolese.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think from now on, Charles is going to give my quotes. He did it much better than I did, with much more feeling than I could do. It's nice to see all of you here today. I got to tell you, this is probably one of the hardest things I had to put together, because it's kind of hard talking about yourself. As you're going to see, there aren't too many pictures of me in here until the end. Now I have somebody following me around with a camera almost everywhere I go, right, Bill? So I get lots of pictures taken, but when I was growing up, my parents, for whatever reason, didn't have a camera or didn't use it. Because if they had one, I'm pretty sure I would have broken it, because I would have tried to take it apart. My sister and I worked really hard to try and find some pictures. So you won't see too many pictures of me as a young boy, but you'll see some things. So why fins to computers? So here's the motivation. As Charles said, when I was very young, I really got interested in rocketry and space flight. It just seemed like the neatest thing, even before John Glenn flew. Or about the time John Glenn flew. When I was in kindergarten, I can remember, whenever they said draw a picture of something you want to do, it was always a rocket. And all those rockets kind of looked like these rockets, right? They all had fins, that's all I ever saw in comic books, cartoons, my toys, they all had fins. And then, kind of John Glenn went up and the rocket looked like that. And there were no fins on it. And that, really kind of baffled my 5, 6, 7 year old mind, and I couldn't quite figure out why that worked. So I went and sort of, looked around in books and stuff like that, and they said, it's the computer that makes it work. And I said, oh, that's what I want to do. And then I had additional motivation. When I was in high school, they took us to the local university, where I ultimately ended up going, actually, University of Buffalo. And we got to meet with the engineering students. And so I went and talked to all of them, and didn't quite know what I was going to do. But anyhow, one of them in the aerospace engineering department, they kind of blew me off. I mean, here's this snotty kid in high school, right, asking questions. And then I went to see the electrical engineers, and they said, oh, gave me a good time, showed me some cool stuff. And I said, well, what's the difference between aerospace and electrical engineering? He said, nobody else can do anything without us. And I said, okay, that settles it. That's what I'm doing. So I saw the ones on TV, the cartoons, tried to build one like that with cardboard and switches. It could add, but it didn't do much more. Saw these other ones and transistors, and I really, got into it. I'd show a picture of a Heathkit one, but I don't have that anymore, and I couldn't find a good Heathkit picture of the ones that you used to build in the radios. So I did that. But now sort of getting into the, into the me part that's beyond the motivation. So I grew up in Buffalo. And for those of you who don't know where Buffalo is, it's up in western New York State. It sits on Lake Erie. And it's really a great place to live. I was going to show where I lived, but basically I lived here and there. We moved around a fair amount when I was, well, actually here and there and up here somewhere. So we moved a fair amount when I was a kid, mostly because of what my parents did. But it's a fun place. I mean, everybody remembers us for snow. This is a picture. When I got a camera, I could take pictures. So that's a picture I took. Obviously, I'm not in the picture because I'm taking the picture. And this is after one of the large snowstorms. This is our front porch. So this is probably to the ground about 8 feet. So that kind of gives you an idea of the snow drift that we would get typically. But we had a great amusement park, Crystal Beach. It's not there anymore, but this ride was one of my favorites. It's called the Comet, and I just loved it and would always go on it. Now, my parents didn't like it, so when I was younger, I fortunately had an uncle that would take me on anything I wanted. And then we had some sports teams that always disappointed. But I love them. I'm still a huge Bills fan and a huge Sabres fan. Although since I moved down here, I have really adopted the Orioles and the Caps, of course, did great this year, right? And the Ravens. I can't say the Redskins, sorry. So those of you who are Redskins fans. And then we had other cool things up in Buffalo that I spent time looking at. Calspan Aerospace was nearby, and they were doing, at the time I was growing up, a lot of testing that made me really see what was going on there. They have Bell Aircraft. Calspan is still there. Bell Aircraft is not there anymore. It's a division of Lockheed, and they would be flying these odd-shaped aircraft around, and that just piqued my interest more and more into what I wanted to do. And when I did have an opportunity to talk to people, again they all said, hey, it's the computer that runs this thing, and that just made it more and more an interest to me about what I wanted to do. So my family, these are my parents. My mother was a secretary. My father was a typewriter repairman. So, we're not sure if my father actually finished high school. He did get a GED. My mother definitely did. This is my favorite picture of my father because we can't figure out why he was fixing a typewriter on the side of a road. So my sister and I have always talked about this picture. My parents passed away many years ago when we were somewhat young, although there's my mother at my sister's wedding. So we never asked, and I always regret it not asking him why he was doing that. But there's a billboard there. There's doing the forensics on it. Where's this, hose coming from. I know it's an air compressor, and I know it's a gun that has air on it. So I'm guessing he's at a gas station, but I still can't figure out why. Now, my mother's a little bit easier to figure out what she's doing. And this is my sister. This is her husband. That's my mother. That's my wife, Diane, and that's me back at my sister's wedding there. And that I did go to school. And yes, I was in the Rocket Club. But I also was on the track team, so I wasn't just playing with rockets. I was doing other things. That's my high school graduation picture. You can see broken tooth and braces. So I wasn't exactly the catch that people were looking for. I show this because this actually has a tie to Goddard. And I guess I should go to the next page. So remember that. I had a tie to Goddard there. So I was going to name this 3 books and changed it after thinking about it. We moved from the city into the suburbs, and I went to Cleveland Hill Middle School and then Cleveland Hill High School. In 2nd grade, I wrote Mirror for some reason. So, you know that permanent record they tell you about? How many of you are still in school? Yeah, that really is a permanent record. It goes with you no matter where you are. So they determined there was something wrong with me. So I wasn't in the regular classes, and in 6th grade, I had a teacher who unfortunately I couldn't get a picture of. I'll show you some of the other ones that really did some things for me. Mr. Griffin, who was the reading teacher, and he asked all of us in the class to pick 3 books and write a book report on it. And these are the 3 books I picked. John Glenn, Walt Disney, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I wrote the book report. He called my parents in, and I figured I was in real trouble. Because teachers only call your parents in when you're in trouble, right? And he told my parents I didn't belong in the lower classes for people that are learning disabled. And thankfully he did that, and he worked with my parents to get me into regular classes in 7th and 8th grade, and then ultimately I got to take honors classes in high school. So this is really where, in my view, my academic career starts, because before that, the teachers just kind of let you do your thing. They didn't worry, about your grades so much. But here, because they didn't expect so much out of you, right? But here was a teacher who really cared about, what the students were doing. Later on, I never really got to talk to Mr. Griffin afterwards, a little bit in high school. He asked the students to pick books to see what we were thinking, right? What kind of things were there. Most of the kids in my class, picked comic books. I didn't. These 2 were definitely kids' books, as you can tell. This is less so a kid's book. And then he wanted to see, what you wrote. And I'm sure it wasn't great prose, but at least it indicated, some kind of a grasp of what I was reading about. That really helps. So one teacher can do, an incredible amount for a student. And then, oddly enough, you'll see that these books sort of played a part in my life as I grew up, particularly, that one. Although when I read this book, I really figured, we would find the monolith, and by 2001, we'd be going to Jupiter. That didn't quite happen. I had 2 other teachers in high school, Mr. Glose, who really made math exciting and interesting for me. And then I had Mr. Weiss, who was my science teacher, as you can probably guess by the picture. And he really kind of forced me to take my rockets and the stuff I was experimenting with transmitters and stuff like that, and do something with it. And he kind of forced is maybe the wrong word, but strongly encouraged me to do a science fair project. And I did, and I won the Western New York Science Fair with my project. That's what this is. And then I got to go to the New York State Science Fair. And anybody here from New York State? Yeah, a few. Well, you know that New York State considers their science fair, better than the world's science fair, because it is the Empire State. At least at that time it was. So I went down there and I really just, and I did well. I didn't win the fair, but I ended up getting, honors, and that was really good. But I also got to meet a lot of people there that, ultimately I would work with. He also, told me about this AIAA thing, American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And as a student, I became a member because of his sponsorship. So I've had 3 teachers, in 6th grade, and then in probably 8th grade and 9th grade that really, pushed me on my way. And remember, this was written by a person here named Jim Berriman at Goddard. So that was my first contact with Goddard Space Flight Center, because in order to do this, I had to understand how rockets worked and how you calculate the center of pressure, how you calculate drag, center of gravity, and he had done all of that stuff for sounding rockets. He actually wrote a thesis on it, and then he made it available to students. This also gives you an example of why you can't trust people to take a picture of you with your own camera. As you can see, whoever took this picture, I know my parents weren't with me, I'm sure it was a friend of mine, kind of missed me a bit. But that is in fact me, because I recognize the shirt. And this is a picture of the high school that I went to. And then some of the inspirational events that did it, of course, as was mentioned, the Mercury program really excited me, like everybody, people going to the moon. But this one, again, is a tie to Goddard. This is a picture of Nimbus. And I remember when I was in that same 6th grade, there was this, things that they handed out every week for you to read. And one of them had I couldn't find the weekly reader or the Scholastic book report thing that they had, but it had a picture of Nimbus and a guy named Harry Press. And ultimately I met Harry Press, and I gave him my copy of that because I had kept it. And I remember reading it and thinking, I was thinking, gee, I want to be an astronaut and do all that kind of cool stuff, fly in space, which I did. But when I read about what he was doing, building this spacecraft, I thought, that's the coolest thing. And it goes back to my computers again and engineering. And I said, that's what I really want to do. Well, where was Nimbus managed from? Goddard. So little did I know that I was figuring out where I was going to work. Ultimately, and through all these various things, Jim Berriman, Harry Press, Nimbus, rockets, they all kind of came together for that. So that kind of gets you from then. Now we can start talking about till now. So where did I go to college? I went undergraduate. I went to the University of Buffalo, State University of New York at Buffalo is the formal name. Got a bachelor's in electrical engineering there. It was a great education because you didn't just study in your field. They gave you a broad curriculum. So it wasn't just electrical engineering when I got to my specialty years, junior and senior year in college. But we also had to take industrial engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering. So that really broadened my engineering background and really set the stage. I include Bettis Reactor Engineering School. You'll see later that I joined the Navy and I was in the nuclear propulsion program. they sent us to school for 9 months for academic training, and then they sent us out to get practical training in submarines and shipbuilding and things like that. But because of the background I had here, I was able to do well here. And then I went, right after that, I went part-time to George Washington University, where I got my master's in electrical engineering and my PhD. So that's kind of my educational background. And then, of course, one of the things, when I was in college, I looked like this. And I did intend to be a pilot. In my senior year, I had to look like this. So that kind of ended my ability to be a pilot. So I decided that I really wanted to do either nuclear power or submarines or both. I didn't really want to do surface ships. Well, in order to go into the nuclear program, you had to go to this guy at that time, Admiral Rickover. Anybody know who Admiral Rickover is? Okay, a few of you do. So Admiral Rickover was the father of the nuclear navy. Back in the 1940s, after the Manhattan Project, after World War II, he conceived the idea that you could put a reactor in a submarine, and now all of a sudden a submarine would truly be a submarine, like Jules Verne. It would be able to stay underwater, only limited by how much food you could take. Because you're surrounded by water, and you can make oxygen, you can make fresh water if you have enough energy. And he did that. And ultimately he rose to the rank of full admiral. This has him as a rear admiral. Ultimately he was a full admiral. But I wanted to show this to see that we're the same rank, see? Not really. So he has you have to meet a certain number of academic requirements in order to get in. You can see those. And then you have a rather difficult set of interviews. And then you meet with the admiral, who ultimately decides on what you're going to do. That interview is, anybody that ever went through it remembers it. It's something to talk about. Because it's not like anything else. You go through some technical interviews and you expect certain things, but he didn't ask any of those things. In fact, if he was asking the questions that he asked, which is why I'm not going to tell you what the interview was, he would have violated, let's see, sexual harassment rules, anti-discrimination, you name it. But it was all to put you off balance and see, how you reacted. Because he recognized that nuclear power is very dangerous. And he had to put you in a situation to see how you would handle stress. And that's exactly what he did. He put each and every one of us in a situation where we it was very stressful. At the time you interview with them, it's your career. You're a midshipman. You're not even, an officer yet. He's going to be entrusting you, and the Navy's going to be entrusting you to operate a bunch of mobile nuclear reactors. Any accident, any significant accident certainly, could be the end of the program. You have, stressful situations when you're underwater. It's not, it's not a safe environment, right? There's no windows. You're driving around an ocean. Based on data that you have to avoid seamounts and what have you. And of course you're underwater. Now I also had an opportunity to go on a surface ship, and the only surface ship I was on was the USS Nimitz twice. Once when it had airplanes on it, which was cool when they were doing air ops, and once when it didn't have airplanes on it when they were testing it, which was cooler because they would throw Volkswagens off the end of the carrier. To test the catapult, which was really neat. Up to that time, I had an opportunity to go on every class of nuclear submarine that they had. I'm now behind. I have not been on the Jimmy Carter class or the Virginia class, but up to that time, I even was on Nautilus, although not at sea. It was in the water. It was still commissioned, but it was being decommissioned at the time. So I was on the first nuclear submarine, and then all the classes after that, up to present day, and that was pretty neat. A letter that Admiral Rickover sent to us. Every week he would send us out something to give you an idea of what he was like. The things he would send to us every Friday were either articles that were really interesting, or things that he had written, or things that he just wanted to get across. Well, one of them, which was about leadership, and some admiral in the Navy had sent out a thing saying that a true leader can be measured by how many people are willing to die for them. So Admiral Rickover, this was before I got there, but he wanted to send it to us to make a point, went off and asked all of his people, how many of you are willing to die for me? He got no volunteers. So he determined he must not be a good leader. So he called up the admiral that did it, and he said, so how many people were willing to die for you? He said all he heard was a click. So, the point was, be careful about what you say. But he would send us these things, and they were they were always interesting. They were always very, very useful. And some of them were even funny. So what were some of the things? I mentioned the books. So, well, we got married in Buffalo. Yes, we got married in January. That's not Snow, that's my wife. That's Diane, and it was very cold when we were there. But see, some people can take photographs, which was kind of good. So one of the things we do on vacations, we go to Disney a lot. So somehow or another, I knew I was going to go to Disney a lot. We have 4 children. When you have 4 children, it's kind of hard to fit in things. So we had to find rides that can do it. This is the Rock and Roller Coaster with my son Dan, daughter Jenny, daughter Lauren, and that's me. This is all 6 of us. That's our youngest, Anna. That's Jenny again. That's Lauren. You can see they like to go on these. That's my wife Diane. That's Dan, and that's me. And I forget. This is the dinosaur ride, and it's all 6 of us in the car. Of course, they're all older now. Jenny is getting married this November. Dan is married and actually has a child. The others have boyfriends, and of course, Diane and I are still married. Some of the mentors, there's one that's not here because I couldn't get a picture. I came here because a person that used to work here, Tom Buckler, had noticed me. I wanted to come and work at NASA, and saw my resume and managed to bring it up over here during a hiring freeze. And Noel Hinners decided that I was somebody worth hiring. And Noel and I got to be good friends until he passed away. So he got me into that. Tom Buckler and Noel Hinners got me into Goddard. And that really started my NASA career after the Navy. And then subsequently, Noel was somebody I would call upon because he had done many of the things that I ultimately did. I was in my various positions, I was deputy AA in space science. He was the AA for science. I was the associate administrator. He was the associate administrator. I'm the Goddard Center Director. He was the Goddard Center Director. So he was somebody I could talk to and really get a sense of things and how things are done. And he could give just great advice. He was also one of those people who did not mythologize his past. He had worked on the Apollo program. He had run the center. He had been senior leadership of NASA and worked in industry. So he kind of told it like it was. When you read the books, people never make a mistake. When you watch the movies, they even have great speeches, right? But real life isn't like that. And Noel was able to put things in perspective. And certainly helped me, as I was going through things and as we go through, difficult times. And then Jerry Soffin was the project scientist or program scientist, I guess in today's terminology, for the Viking program. At the time I came to Goddard, he was the EOS senior project scientist, I think it was called at the time. And he was another person that was really instrumental because we worked together and in developing EOS. He also introduced me to somebody who was a great friend, Piers Sellers. Jerry was instrumental in getting Piers over here from University of Maryland, where he was working at the time, and hooked the two of us up together. And that helped us develop the EOS program. I wouldn't say that we were the three instrumental people, but we were three people that were very much engaged in it and helped to develop that program over time. And then Bill Townsend was at NASA headquarters. He became the deputy center director here. He was somebody, along with Jerry Madden, who was here and one of our famed project managers. Guided me and convinced me that I should be a project manager, which was one of the things that any of you who are an engineer, you realize that project managers are the people that keep you from doing things. So it wasn't exactly a position that I was really thinking about at the time, but these two told me about the things that you can really do and how you can influence things as a project manager and move up. And there's kind of a lesson there. I really struggled. That was probably the hardest decision I had to make, right? I mean, when it came from 6th grade going into that was easy. My parents made that decision for me. In college, it was a matter of studying and doing well and moving to your objective. Wanting to come to NASA, I always wanted to do. Be a great engineer was something I wanted to do. Moving into project management was something I really had to think about. What I realized later in life, not immediately, is when you have folks that are suggesting that you do things, they're doing it because they see potential. They see potential in you. And the other thing you need to recognize is they're willing to help you. And so one of the things that I would say to people, to you all, is when you're asked to do something, people are seeing potential in you. They're recognizing your capabilities. And they're also going to help you succeed. I mean, they're not just going to let you go and fail. And, Bill and Jerry definitely, demonstrated that. Joe Fuller is one of my heroes. He was on the Gemini program and the Apollo program down at Johnson. And he was really one of those people that was in the background as a mentor. He started his own company called Futron. And he and I hit it off, a number of years ago, many years ago, in fact, in the 90s. And he would just come to my office and we would sit down and talk. And he would ask me questions that I wouldn't ask myself, like, where do you want to be? What do you want to do? And then he would give me suggestions. And they were always good suggestions. And he has, pretty much, I shouldn't say followed me. He's stayed in contact. We've stayed in contact for years. In fact, I have a visiting committee here, and he's one of the critical members of it because he continues to provide nothing but great advice, both personal advice for, how to live your life as well as professional. Then Ed Weiler, I had the opportunity when I was running the earth science programs in the Flight Projects Directorate. Ed called me up and asked if I wanted to be his deputy. It's another case where I wasn't ever thinking of going to headquarters because if you think project managers are bad, just think what headquarters is like, right? And of course, I spent 10 years at headquarters, so I know how important headquarters is. But Ed, kind of introduced me to that and showed me really how you work at a grander scale. As a project manager and deputy director of, you interact with a lot of different people, but mostly with the workforce, partner organizations, contractors, occasionally with the public and the political establishment. But when you go to headquarters, you deal with a totally different environment. It's far more political. It's far less definitive. There isn't always a right answer. There's more nuance to almost everything that you do. And Ed was a master of it, is a master of it. So having the opportunity to work with Ed was really good. And Mike Griffin is a little bit different. Mike's been my boss, but more importantly, he was a friend when we started. Back in the 80s, when I was still in the Navy, I mentioned about Admiral Rickover being an interesting kind of a character. Well, at one point, he wanted to get something done. And he was frustrated with how the solution was coming out. So he insisted that the junior officers come up with a solution. So myself and this other junior officer, by the way, is somebody like a lieutenant, Lieutenant JG, an ensign. I was, I guess, an ensign at the time, maybe a Lieutenant JG, and a lieutenant. We made a proposal. Rickover liked it, said go off and do it, but if you fail, I'm going to castrate you. So you want to talk about motivation? And we did, and we succeeded. And one of the things that he did at that point is he asked what I wanted to do, and I said, space was one of the things, and it turned out that at that time the Navy was working on something called NROS that was supposed to be nuclear powered, so he was part of it, so he allowed me to work on it. And guess who was one of the guys working on it? This guy. So we got to know each other then, and throughout the years we kind of touched base back and forth. Ultimately, he became my boss when he became the administrator at NASA, and he pulled me out of Goddard, which I didn't forgive him for, and maybe chief engineer and AA, which I have forgiven him for. Because those, again, were opportunities for me to really grow and learn how to do things. But like everything, it comes with some challenges. So like everybody, I'm sure, there's lots and lots of people in your life that change your direction, help you get things done in a whole variety of ways. There's more that I could mention, but these half dozen or so and Tom are the ones that I think were the most significant. And then another mentor was John Glenn. Again, this book. John and I, met when I was chief engineer. Can't remember exactly the circumstance, but anyhow, we met when I was chief engineer. He was on the NASA advisory committee at the time. We were talking about nuclear power. And my background, having been in the Navy, of course, he was a colonel in the Marine Corps and an astronaut, so we kind of hit it off, and we were talking on a regular basis. And then we had the opportunity to fly together to California, where we spent a fair amount of time talking. So we got to know each other, and John would, call up every once in a while and offer suggestions, or we'd meet every occasionally. And one time, there was an event down at Kennedy, and I brought two of my kids. This is Jenny and this is Lauren. She's the older one, she's the younger one. She really didn't go to the University at Buffalo. But as you can see, I did give out things. He introduced us to Scott Carpenter, and so my kids got to meet him. But this is the one picture I have. And again, it shows that when you have a photographer following you around that knows how to do things, you can get good pictures. I'm in the picture. Notice that? I'm in the picture. See that? That's pretty good. So John Glenn became a mentor as well, and that was really neat. I mean, talking to the first American to orbit the Earth, and the oldest American to orbit the Earth. I think the oldest person still to orbit the Earth, was really neat, and he was really chipper back then. So that was fun. That was really fun and really educational to hear the very different world that he lived in the 50s and 60s and the early days of the space program compared to what we have today. Was really quite different. And then, of course, my last mission that I got to manage, Terra, which, in case you're wondering, is the best spacecraft the center has ever launched. Just trying to keep that in mind. But I like this picture, and Steve Brill, who was my planner, put this together. And the reason I like this picture is because it really tells the story of a mission, right? I mean, this is what we all care about, but all of us are needed in order to make it a success. And this isn't everybody, of course, but this is all the people that they could put together. So this collage is really something that's particularly meaningful to me because it shows what it takes to build a spacecraft, launch it, and get great data. And it's everybody. And you probably recognize a few of the people in here if you can see it back there. It's just been a great team, and I'm forever grateful to those people because without them, I certainly wouldn't be in the job I'm in today, and Tara wouldn't be delivering the data that's going on today. And I don't think we would have an NPOS if it wasn't for this and EOSTIS and Aqua and Aura that prove that we can build bigger science satellites that can provide data in real time. So that was really a fun time. I was a chief engineer in AA. So the first few flights up here were experiments that we did with at Goddard to go off and verify capability that flew on Terra called capillary pump heat pipes, loop heat pipes, which were a bit of a challenge. The ones in red box, excuse me, red boxes have some interest in them. This is the first shuttle flight I went to with UARS. I really had nothing to do with it, just happened to be the first one I got to go to. The other ones happened while we had some experiments on them. STS-103 was SM-3A. I mentioned this one because it messed up Terra. We both launched in December. They took my TDRS away from me, which made life difficult when we were doing commissioning. STS-109, 3B, that was a very successful mission, and I was deputy AA at that time. And then from these, I was either chief engineer or associate administrator. This first one I'm going to talk about on the next chart, STS-121. That was my first flight as chief engineer. These other ones, I was chief engineer or AA on these, and here I was AA on these flights, associate administrator. These I was acting administrator. These were interesting ones, and I guess I'm going to go forward and backwards. STS-121, that was the flight, had a number of things. Piers Sellers was on it, was one. It was the second return to flight after Columbia. And if you remember on Columbia, it was a piece of foam that came off the external tank that hit the leading edge of the wing, putting a hole in there. And then when the crew came back on entry, it melted the spars in the wing came off, and of course the orbiter broke up and the crew was killed. The following flight, after about a year, where they made some changes, had a large piece of foam come off, called a pail ramp. Fortunately, it missed the orbiter. They made some additional corrections, and then we went to the next flight, which was STS-121. And in STS-121, we still had the potential for foam to come off. Brian O'Connor was the head of safety and mission assurance. I was the chief engineer, and our teams were not comfortable with the decision to fly. So we said we didn't agree that we should fly. Your actions have consequences, but you can speak up when it's appropriate to speak up. And we did, and we got a lot of press as a result of it. And you can look at the document that says, are we going to launch or are we not going to launch? And there's only one answer allowed. We're going to launch. So Brian and I had to make up our answer, which said, we're not going to launch. Now we were overruled, and we agreed to let it fly, with our concern still there. And the reason we agreed is because, again, we were after Columbia. They had reduced the size of the crew on the station from 6 to 3. So we had a lot of water, a lot of oxygen, a lot of space. So we could handle 7 additional people, and we had a way of getting the crew back. So we had no more risk, they call it going uphill, when the shuttle launches. So going uphill, there was really no more risk than we normally had. It was coming back that we would have, more risk, and we could inspect for that. So, so we ultimately agreed to do that. So that was the first time I really had a major role in a shuttle program. Now, what makes it interesting is, as you've seen all the way up until now, I've been on the science side of things, the robotics side. So I wasn't a shuttle person. I hadn't been in there for 10 or 20 or 30 years like all the other people sitting around the table. So that made life kind of interesting too. But in the end, it all worked out. Mike didn't hold it against me, and he still promoted me. That's important because the next flights, when I was the acting administrator, so Mike Griffin was the appointed administrator. He's Senate confirmed, and he has 2 people in his organization that disagree. On STS-1, I think it was STS-124, we had an issue where in the shuttle main engines, there's little poppet valves, and a piece of the poppet valve had come off, a flow control valve, and if it would have hit in a certain way, it could have been a bad day. We discovered that while we were flying STS-126. So Mike is gone when STS-119 is supposed to start. I'm the acting administrator, and we've got this issue, and we want to fly. I got to convince a new administration that we should go. Needless to say, that wasn't an easy thing to do, but we were able to show, because NASA has such a strong workforce and such a strong technical base, that we were able to address all of the questions that people had. And we were allowed to fly, and the mission was successful, and that was great. That was really good. STS-125 was the shuttle mission. It was also when I was acting administrator. We still don't have a congressionally approved, Senate confirmed administrator. And this is the first flight and the only flight after Columbia not to go to the space station. So again, we had to convince the administration that this was okay. Because all these other flights, if something bad happened, unless it happened, in the powered flight phase, we could shelter on the space station. This one you can't. And anybody watch Gravity? There are no places in Hubble to hide, okay? And you can't get to the space station from Hubble. So fortunately, Gravity wasn't out at the time. So we had to explain that, we felt that the risk was reasonable. We had a second orbiter ready to fly if we really ran into issues. Fortunately, we didn't need to do that, and it worked. And then finally, the last one I did as the acting administrator was STS-127, and that went well. Although personally, this one was kind of difficult because my mother-in-law was very ill at the time, and she passed away actually when this was going on. So my wife and I were juggling children around as I was trying to get this off the ground and back on Earth. But we did. So everything kind of works out. And this is one of my favorite pictures of me because when you're a real worker, they don't take any pictures of you. But you got things that you can touch, and they do things, right? When you're in the control room here at senior levels, all you can do is on the monitor is change the picture that you see, right? And when they call you up and say, should we launch, there's only one answer. No, right? Because you're too far away from it to be able to say much else. But you get a big window, and you get to look out of it when it's launching. And you can see I'm not talking to anybody because my microphone is up behind my head. So now, in my career, spacecraft that I've been associated with have visited every planet except for the one in a box, Venus. We got to get to Venus. We keep on proposing it here at Goddard, and one of these days we're going to win. We came close on this last New Frontiers, And hopefully we're going to get there, because I'd like to close out my career knowing that we're going to Venus. You know, the last time we were there was in the 70s or 80s, so 30, 40 years ago, where we've been to Mercury on an APL spacecraft, been to the moon with a Goddard spacecraft and others, obviously Earth, Mars with JPL and Goddard spacecraft and Goddard instruments on JPL spacecraft and other countries' spacecraft, been to asteroids, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, other people's spacecraft, but our instruments on it. And I've been fortunate to, when I was at headquarters, to be involved with those missions. We've been to comets. Got to get to Venus. Anybody want to get to Venus now? Okay, good. This kind of gives you an idea of some of the mission involvement that I had. Those of you who know Mike Ruskevich, one of the things that I got to do is when I was at headquarters at AA and acting administrator was go to Russia, because the Russians were launching us at that time. They've always actually, not always launched us to the space station, but they were the prime rescue vehicle for space station. So our prime crews would go on a Soyuz to go there. So Mike and I got to go there. They took us around their factory, but their Air and Space Museum happens to be in their factories. So we happened to be at Korolev, and this is Gagarin's capsule. So that was kind of neat that they let us go right up to it and look into it. Talked about that. Some of the things that we do. This is John Holdren. He was somebody that helped. This is me justifying our budget over those years, talking about JWST at the Curiosity landing, celebrating during the Memorial Day that we have every January for the crews and the people that were lost in the line of duty. Deal a lot with lawmakers. That's part of what I do. Sometimes we get cool pictures taken. And this is true at Wallops. We do the International Space Station from 0A, and we went to the moon from 0B. So this happens to be the former governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, and a bunch of other folks. That's Bill Rebell and some of the local dignitaries there. And as you can see, we deal with members of Congress. This one was kind of fun with Lamar Smith. Mike Watkins and I met with Lamar Smith. We gave him a gift, and then he gave me a tie. So it was kind of fun. And this, of course, is Senator Van Hollen. Do get to meet with a lot of other people. This is me in the Oval Office. See, when the photographers are good. I'm hiding in the background there. We're bringing the crew in to talk to the president. That's, of course, with Nancy Roman, one of the first leaders of astrophysics at NASA. People probably recognize this young lady as Senator Mikulski, who has been a champion for us. We had the King of Sweden here, and Neil deGrasse Tyson. This is me under the shuttle. It actually is warm when it comes back. We don't get to go to it right away because they have to let it outgas, and you can see all the air conditioning that's running into it. But being on the runway after the shuttle lands is really neat. And then, of course, this is the interesting part when you're testifying. This looks like a budget hearing. This was a fun hearing. This was talking about technology. I suppose no hearing is really fun, but this one was more fun as we were talking about, what does NASA bring to the world in terms of technology. This is supporting our colleagues in the DoD and NOAA. Mary Glacken and I were doing a lot of talking back. Anybody working JPSS here? Yeah, so before JPSS it was NPOS, and of course it was absolutely critical to have those weather satellites. When NPOS got in trouble, we needed to really go in and work it, and Mary and I were regularly up on the Hill talking about it. This was a not so fun hearing talking about our overruns. Every AA gets to do that. Steve Jerzik just did it a couple of weeks ago. Christina has been there at all of them. And then there's always one or two extra other witnesses. This happens to be Gary Pulliam, but you can tell by the facial expressions whether it's a fun hearing or not. And then, of course, this is the next generation. This is my granddaughter, Maddie. And she's got the right shirt. and she's enjoying herself in the water. So that's the end of my presentation.